Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, an Iraq veteran and wheelchair user, was accused of her husband's murder. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment for first-degree murder. Everyone believed Sarah was guilty. But Sarah's loyal German Shepherd, Ranger, was about to uncover the real killer when he found something in the garden. The silence in Jefferson County Courthouse was terrifying. When the jury foreman stood up, everyone in the courtroom held their breath. Sarah Mitchell sat upright in her wheelchair, but her hands were trembling. After 3 months of trial, the moment of verdict had finally arrived. On the charge of first-degree murder? Guilty, said the jury foreman in a cold voice. Sarah's world collapsed. Some people in the courtroom let out sighs of relief. Prosecutor Michael Thompson nodded with satisfaction. Media representatives took notes to write their stories. Veteran wife killed her husband. Judge Dorothy Harrison adjusted her glasses. Sarah Mitchell, you are sentenced to life imprisonment for the cold-blooded murder of David Mitchell. Sarah's lawyer, James Morrison, hung his head. For 3 months, he had tried to prove Sarah's innocence, but the evidence was against her. David Mitchell being found with a fatal head wound, Sarah being at home, the weapon being Sarah's pistol from her military past. Sarah was crying silently. She had lost both legs in a bomb explosion in Iraq, but this was nothing compared to that. She had lost David, the love of her life, and now she was losing her freedom. Worst of all, everyone thought she was a killer. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Harrison said sternly, do you have any final words? Sarah lifted her head. Her eyes were teary but determined. I did not kill my husband, she said in a trembling but strong voice. I loved David. In our 10 years of marriage, I never laid a hand on him. Murmurs began in the courtroom. Some didn't believe Sarah. Of course she won't admit her guilt, whispered David's sister Margaret. Heartless woman. Sarah continued. The real killer hasn't been caught yet. One day the truth will come out. Judge Harrison banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. Guards grabbed Sarah's wheelchair and began removing her from the courtroom. Sarah looked at the courtroom one last time. Her family had come to support her, but David's family looked at her with anger. Sarah's only consolation was Ranger, who was waiting outside the courtroom. The 3-year-old German Shepherd had been trained for trauma therapy after Sarah returned from Iraq. But Ranger wasn't just a therapy dog. He was a professional dog with military search and rescue training, specialized in bomb and drug detection. When Ranger saw Sarah, he immediately ran to her side. Sarah petted her dog's head. You're my only true friend, boy, she whispered. Margaret Mitchell looked at Ranger and wrinkled her nose. That dog is as dangerous as she is, she told her husband Robert. Good thing they're taking her to prison. But Margaret didn't know that Ranger sensed that nothing about David's death was as it seemed, and very soon this loyal dog would take action to ensure justice was served. As Sarah was loaded into the prison van, Ranger tried to run after her. Animal rights volunteer Emma Rodriguez held Ranger back. Don't worry, boy, she told the dog. We'll wait for Sarah. But Ranger wouldn't just wait. He would search. 6 months ago, Sarah and David Mitchell's marriage was perfect. They lived a happy life in their modest home in Denver. Sarah's transition to a wheelchair had been difficult, but David never complained. He had modified the house according to Sarah's needs, built ramps and changed the bathroom and kitchen. David worked as a baggage security supervisor at Denver International Airport. Sarah worked as a veteran counselor helping other veterans. The couple loved each other very much and were planning to have children soon. That night, everything was normal. When Sarah came home from the veteran support group meeting, David was watching television. Hello, honey, David had said. I made dinner. Sarah went to the kitchen and washed the dishes. David went to take a shower. Sarah fell asleep while watching television in the living room. When she woke up at 6 a.m. to Ranger's barking, she found David in his study covered in blood. Police Detective Mark Stevens had quickly jumped to conclusions. David being found with a fatal head wound, the weapon being Sarah's military pistol, no one else being in the house. Everything pointed to Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Stevens had said coldly, did you fight with your husband? No, Sarah had answered in shock. David and I never fought. But when Stevens learned that Sarah was receiving PTSD treatment, his suspicions increased. PTSD patients can be aggressive, he had told Prosecutor Thompson. She has weapons training. We'll find the motive. They had no trouble finding a motive. David's life insurance policy was worth $500,000. Additionally, David's sister Margaret claimed that Sarah was using David for money. David was constantly paying Sarah's medical bills, Margaret had testified in court. Prosthetic legs, therapy sessions, medications. She was exploiting David. This was completely false, but the jury believed it. Sarah's lawyer, James Morrison, had presented Sarah's military service record: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, exemplary conduct. But prosecutor Thompson was stronger. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Thompson had said in his closing arguments, "Sarah Mitchell is a trained killer. She learned to kill people in Iraq. She used the same skills to kill her husband at home." The evidence was against Sarah, but a critical detail had been overlooked. Ranger was very restless at the crime scene. The dog kept running to the garden, digging, barking. Police officers hadn't paid attention to this. "Stupid dog," Officer Bradley had said. "He's traumatized from seeing the body." But Ranger wasn't traumatized. He was looking for something. Thanks to his military training, he was detecting unusual scents. There was someone else's smell in David's study. Sarah didn't recognize it, but Ranger did. Another detail had been missed in the crime scene investigation. There was skin tissue under David's fingernails, but the DNA test didn't match Sarah's. The lab technician had reported this detail, but Prosecutor Thompson found it insignificant and ignored it. Most importantly, David's calendar showed he had a meeting with someone that night. BK, 9 p.m. was written. Police couldn't find these initials because no one in David's social circle had these initials. But Ranger knew. That smell was from the person who was in David's study that night, and very soon, this loyal dog would uncover the truth. Sarah was now sitting in her solitary cell at Colorado Women's Correctional Facility. Ranger was waiting for Sarah at Emma Rodriguez's house, but he was tired of waiting. That night, Ranger returned to Sarah's house. Emma Rodriguez was in panic mode when she was looking for Ranger. "Ranger, where are you?" she shouted in the dark streets of Denver. The dog had disappeared after dinner, and Emma was searching for him everywhere. Ranger was in the garden of Sarah and David's old house. The house was now empty. The bank had started foreclosure after the court decision. But for Ranger, this was still home. It was where Sarah's scent was strongest. The dog was conducting systematic research in the garden. His military training had taught him methodical searching, decoding codes, finding hidden objects, detecting unusual activities. These were Ranger's specialties. That night, he could detect the scents from 6 months ago more clearly. When the soil was moist after rain, scents became more intense. Ranger stopped under the study window and sniffed. Sarah's scent, David's scent, but something else. A familiar scent. Ranger had picked up this scent before, but where? The dog tried to concentrate. He activated his scent memory as he had learned in military training. Then he remembered. This scent came from David's workplace, Denver International Airport. He picked up this scent when they went to pick up David from work, but not just at the airport, from a specific person. Ranger began digging in the garden. His nose sensors had detected an unusual metallic scent right under the study window, among the flower beds. His paws quickly dug up the soil. The first thing he found was a small metal object. Ranger took this in his mouth and began running to look for Emma. He found Emma 2 blocks away. "Ranger, where have you been?" Emma bent down with the usual anger, but noticed that Ranger had something in his mouth. "What is this?" When she took the object from Ranger's mouth, she was shocked. This was a button, an expensive suit button. Initials were engraved underneath, BK. Emma's heart began beating rapidly. The meeting written BK 9 p.m. on David's calendar. Police had said they couldn't find these initials. "Ranger, is there more?" Emma asked excitedly. Ranger led Emma back to the garden and continued digging. This time, what he found was even more shocking, a blood-stained piece of tissue. But the blood looked different from David's, fresher, different color. Emma immediately took out her cell phone and called James Morrison. Sarah's lawyer would be annoyed by the evening call, but this was an emergency. "Mr. Morrison, this is Emma Rodriguez. I'm taking care of Sarah Mitchell's dog. Ranger found something, very important." Morrison was initially skeptical, but when Emma described the button and tissue, it caught his interest. "Don't touch anything. Call the police immediately, but call me first. This evidence must not be contaminated." But when Emma looked at Ranger, she understood that the dog wasn't finished yet. Ranger was now digging behind the fence in the neighbor's yard. He was moving with military precision. This wasn't random digging. Finally, Ranger found a metal object. It was shining in the moonlight. When Emma looked closely, her breath caught. This was a key, a car key, and on the keychain it said, B. Kingston, Airport Security. Emma's hands began trembling. BK equals B. Kingston. He was David's work colleague, and this key proved he was at the house on the night David was murdered. Ranger looked at Emma and wagged his tail. Mission accomplished, but the dog's duties weren't finished yet. This was just the beginning. The real killer was still free, and Sarah was still in prison. When James Morrison saw the evidence, he immediately took action. The button, bloody tissue, and most importantly the car key, these were game changers. But filing motions in the legal system took time, and Sarah was spending every day in prison. Morrison called Detective Stevens. "Mark, there's new evidence. You need to reopen the Sarah Mitchell case." Stevens was initially reluctant. "Morrison, the case is closed. The evidence was clear." "Have you heard the name B. Kingston?" Morrison asked directly. Stevens's silence told Morrison everything. "Who is this?" Stevens finally asked. "David Mitchell's work colleague. He had a meeting with David on the night of the murder, and the dog found his personal effects in the garden." Stevens realized they might have made a major mistake. "I'm coming," he said reluctantly. Meanwhile, Ranger and Emma were researching Kingston's identity. Emma searched the internet for B. Kingston Airport Security Denver. The results were shocking. Brian Kingston worked in the same department as David, but public records showed he had financial problems, bankruptcy filing, gambling debts, divorce settlement, and most critically, he was a witness to David's life insurance policy. When Emma did a deeper investigation, she discovered that Kingston had borrowed money from David, a large amount, and David had recently demanded repayment. Morrison sent the evidence to the police lab and was waiting for DNA results. The blood in the tissue wasn't David's, it was someone else's blood, and the skin tissue sample under David's fingernails matched the DNA found on the button. Stevens finally reopened the case and called Kingston for interrogation. Kingston was initially confident. "David was my friend," Kingston told Stevens. "I was at home on the night of the murder, watching television with my wife." But when Stevens placed the car key on the table, Kingston's facial expression completely changed. "Where did you find this?" Kingston asked nervously. "In David Mitchell's garden, at the murder scene. Weren't you there that night, Brian?" Kingston began to break down. I only went for the money. David had lent me money. He was demanding repayment, but I had no money." Stevens applied more pressure. "What happened that night, Brian?" "David was angry. He was threatening me. He said he would take legal action. I panicked. I saw David's gun in the study and—" Kingston made a full confession. He told how he accidentally killed David. Then when he saw Sarah sleeping, he decided to frame her. He had placed the gun in Sarah's hand and transferred her fingerprints to the weapon. "But when I was leaving, the button came off and fell into the garden. Also, David fought back and scratched me. Blood dripped." Stevens recorded the entire confession. Kingston was arrested and immediately sent to court. Morrison rushed to the prison to give Sarah the news. When Sarah heard the news, she cried. Relief, anger, sadness, everything mixed together. "Ranger," Sarah whispered, "he saved me." Judge Harrison called an emergency hearing. In the face of Kingston's confession and DNA evidence, Sarah's conviction was overturned. Sarah was immediately released. At the prison gates, Emma and Ranger were waiting for Sarah. Sarah hugged Ranger tightly from her wheelchair. "You're my hero," she whispered in the dog's ear. "You found David's real killer." But the most emotional moment was when Sarah visited David's grave. "Honey," she said to the tombstone, "justice was served. Ranger saved you." 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell was a completely different woman. She had used the wrongful imprisonment compensation from the legal system to establish a nonprofit organization helping veterans with PTSD. The organization, called Ranger's Heroes, matched service dogs with veterans. Brian Kingston had received a life sentence without parole for first-degree murder. During the trial, he had made a full confession detailing how he killed David over a money dispute. Prosecutor Thompson had publicly apologized to Sarah, but the damage had already been done. Sarah's greatest vindication was the national media attention. CNN, Fox News, 60 Minutes, everyone covered Sarah and Ranger's story. Hero Dog Solves Murder headlines appeared everywhere. The veteran community had completely embraced Sarah, a wrongfully accused veteran who proved her innocence through her service dog. This was a powerful narrative. Donations flooded into Ranger's heroes. Sarah now lived in a new house in Denver, specially designed for disabled veterans, full of ramps and accessibility features. Most importantly, the large backyard provided space for Ranger to play and train. Ranger had become a national celebrity. The American Kennel Club had honored him with the Hero Dog of the Year award. Discovery Channel had made a documentary, The Dog Who Solved Murder. Ranger calmly handled the fame, typical military discipline. Sarah continued veteran counseling in her daily routine, but now had a special focus: wrongfully accused veterans and military families in crisis. Her experience provided a unique perspective. The justice system isn't perfect, Sarah said at support group meetings, but truth always emerges, sometimes in unusual ways. Emma Rodriguez had officially become the volunteer coordinator for Ranger's Heroes. Sarah would never forget Emma's loyalty and dedication. Emma had believed in Ranger and taken the evidence seriously. Detective Stevens had personally apologized to Sarah. "I conducted a lazy investigation," he had said honestly. "I made assumptions. This taught me a valuable lesson." Stevens now advocated using service dogs in cold cases. Ranger had become a model. Properly trained dogs could find evidence and solve crimes. Margaret Mitchell, David's sister, had asked for a formal apology from Sarah. At a family gathering, Margaret had embraced Sarah with tears. "I was wrong," Margaret had admitted. "David loved you so much. Forgive me." Sarah had graciously given forgiveness and restored family relationships. They would work together to honor David's memory. The most meaningful moment occurred when Sarah made her monthly visit to David's grave. Ranger always came with Sarah, sitting quietly beside the tombstone. "David," Sarah said at every visit, "Ranger brought justice. You would be proud." On the anniversary, exactly 1 year after the murder night, Sarah organized a special ceremony. Military honor guard, veteran community, and Ranger's Heroes beneficiaries gathered. They celebrated David's memory and the triumph of justice. Sarah said in her final speech, "David is physically gone, but his spirit lives on. Ranger showed us that truth is a powerful force. Love, loyalty, and justice always win." At the end of the ceremony, Ranger sat proudly beside Sarah's wheelchair. The hero dog had completed his mission. Sarah was free, justice had been served, and David could rest in peace. A perfect ending to true friendship, unconditional loyalty, and never giving up on the truth. The end.